Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, the Ad Blocker Balancing Act. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lucia Morris, Coordinator at Custom, Digiday's creative content agency. Today's webinar is presented by our partner, Instart Logic. Instart Logic is the market leader in restoring publisher rights and revenue in the face of ad blockers, recovering more than 5 billion impressions every month for many of the world's leading media companies. We're joined today by Dan Drucker, CMO of Instart Logic, and he will be your moderator. Dan is responsible for all global marketing functions at Instart Logic. He is a seasoned marketing executive driving more than 3 billion in IPO and M&A transactions and counting. Prior to joining Instart Logic, he served as Chief Marketing Officer at Asabi and Zscaler, Digital Marketing Leader at MyBuys, Cloud ERP Leader at Intact, and Cloud Security Innovator at Postini. Dan has also held senior marketing and sales roles at IBM, Trigo Technologies, Hyperion Solutions, Arbor Software, and Oracle. Dan holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford University and an MBA from UCLA. And joining the panel, we have Stephen Gandy, SVP of User Experience and Content at Edmunds, Shruti Tiwari, Media Director at Sapien Razorfish, and last but not least, Simon Loxam, VP of Digital Technology at Time Inc. A question and answer period will follow this panel, so please stay with us until the end. Feel free to submit questions at any time via the GoToWebinar platform. And just a quick reminder, everyone who registered for today's webinar will also receive an email with a recording of the session, so stay tuned for that. Okay, let's get started. Dan, take it away.
Great. So first, let's, and thank you for that, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. So today is going to be a roughly 45-minute panel discussion, and we have amazing folks with tons of experience on the call today, and this is going to be all about best practices. There will be zero fluff in today's webcast, and the goal is to give all of you that are listening really actionable things you can take home and do today to think about this kind of war around what we do with ad blocking and how we think about it and what we can do about it. What I'd like to do first is just go around to our panelists and so you can get a hold of folks' voices and have each of you do a very brief introduction on yourself, name, company, a little bit about what you do in the day, and let's start with Stephen.
Morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Gandy. I am the SVP of User Experience and Content, and I'm really responsible for the design and the user experience of our whole website, and that includes our display advertising.
Fabulous. Simon?
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Simon Loxam. I worked for Time Inc. up until the end of June. I'm based in London, so have a good experience of what's happening in Europe with ad blocking.
Fabulous. Shruti?
Hi, this is Shruti here. I am the media director at the Sapien Razorfish, and part of my responsibility is working within the digital ad space on what's coming in terms of the industry and the trends, and also bringing thought leadership in terms of bringing the clients disruptive experiences.
Fantastic. Okay, so, and this is Dan Drucker speaking, so you get the voice. So, why are we here today? Really, this is about the future of media, the future of journalism and of high-quality content. It's very clear that ad blocking is putting all of these things at risk, the idea of ad-supported, high-quality content on the internet. We all know that the global publishing industry depends on digital advertising revenue to survive. And the very latest numbers we see are that ad blocker penetration is growing at over 30% a year. It's running about 25% in North America, 40% in Europe, and as high as 80% in parts of Asia. When I look at my clients, I hear typically ad block rates, overall ad block rates, and we'll talk about this with the panelists later, but between around 15% of visitors at a low and all the way up to 75% of visitors for companies that skew to a male, younger demographic. Imagine how you would make revenue if 70% of your visitors are behind ad blockers. The brand new news in the space is that several weeks ago, Google announced that it plans to include ad blocking in Chrome, and some of that functionality is already in the latest Google Canary push. So this is really happening quickly. There's huge asymmetries, as you all know, in the digital advertising market. In 2017, more than 99% of growth in digital advertising revenue went to just two companies, Google and Facebook. And so they, of course, are very intimately involved in this whole discussion about, supporting your business via digital ads. What we're seeing happen is that publishers are losing essential revenues that they need to fund content creation, to pay wages, to ensure that high quality, free to view content continue to exist. And this is really the crux of today's panel, is how in the industry, we can't accept increasing numbers of consumers that are accessing content that we spend so much money on to create with no corresponding revenue coming in to match. So with that context and background, the folks on the call today are really amazing digital advertising experts who are taking on these challenges, and they're winning. For the next roughly 34 minutes, they will share their expertise, learnings, and best practices with you. And what I'm going to do as the moderator is not to do the kind of boring, hey, let's ask a question and then all four panelists can agree. We're going to try to do a little sparks for you. We'll have questions, directed at specific panelists and maybe a little bit of follow-up. But what we won't do is one of the, everybody weigh in and agree with each other on every topic. So with that, I'm going to start with Stephen, and I'd like the panelists just to briefly cover, maybe a minute or two, talk about the journey, whether it's your journey of your firm or that, in the case of Shruti, with your clients. And just talk about, what the challenges and fears were in your firm around ad blocking and ad unblocking, and how really ad blocking and how you deal with ad blocking, what you've learned and tried, are there a couple of best practices, and how are things working? And so, Stephen, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think about 18 months ago, we were pretty scared at the prospect of sort of the growth we were seeing. So we got pretty active on, really measuring and seeing what the growth looked like. We also, for certain ad units, especially on our homepage and the upper sort of funnel of our site, we also practice with site serving some of the ads. But that was not a solution that was going to scale, through all the various advertisers that we have and all the sort of targeting. So that's not a full solution. So we are an Instart Logic customer, have been so for over a year now. And that was, that's been part of our strategy as we've been able to sort of recover. But we tried everything. We tried sort of, so all the tactics around asking for people to turn ad blocking off. And that works sometimes, but it's definitely, it doesn't scale, and it's wrought with a lot of user experience pitfalls that can really not only mess up your site, but sort of make the user experience and conversion somewhat awkward.
Okay, Simon, kind of same question. Your journey around this.
Yeah, so ad blocking in Europe is generally quite high, and again, as you say, especially that kind of younger, tech-savvy kind of generation. I think the danger is that as it becomes more widespread, if somebody like McAfee installs it by default, or as you say, Google, then the problem becomes extremely difficult to get around. Certainly, we tried the nice asking, please turn an ad blocker off, and that didn't go down too well. I think from a publisher's point of view, as well as other companies, we are at fault by stuffing as many ads onto the page as possible to try and make up for the revenues lost elsewhere, and particularly in B2C publishing around, the previous magazine paid content model, whereas online, generally people don't pay for content, so advertising is the only way to get decent revenues, and nobody's really stopped publishers putting more and more adverts on, and I think that's driven the problem in the industry, and that's why we're facing ad blocking as such a growing problem, and slowing revenues down.
Great. Okay, Shruti, can you talk a little bit about, your clients.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from them, and then what things are they trying to do, and what's the journey there?
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting because what I'm hearing from what Simon and Stephen has to say, because I agree to the point where the clients are a little skeptical in terms of, ad revenue spend that is as depleting in terms of from a desktop perspective. However, there is a very significant rise with 76% of budget still going within the Google space and Facebook. The other thing what I've noticed is, I think we all have to agree to move away from the typical, banners and standard ads, which we call as a display ads. I think consumers are looking for a little bit more immersive experience, and what I've seen a very huge success is when content is sort of integrated into the part of the experience of what they're trying to get. We've seen a lot more success come through than a typical, you would call, I call typical banner ads or display ads. So that's where I think we feel that the industry is moving towards, and I think the clients are resonating a lot more, and they want us to work with partners that are bringing first to market kind of experiences that can enhance that versus just showing ads for just like a pre-roll or something.
Got it. Thank you, Shruti. So Stephen, as you guys have certainly at Edmunds, as you tried a number of different things to deal with, ad blocking. So could you talk about some of those, initial tactics you mentioned? Asking them what are the spectrum of things that companies will try to do, and kind of what works and doesn't work from your perspective to deal with this from a website engagement perspective.
Right. I mean, I can speak for, I've seen the common tactics that are out there.
Yep.
For us, we briefly tried asking people. I mean, I think our audience skews a little bit older, which was a curse years ago, but sort of a blessing in disguise for us right now, because I think, our latest blocking rates are around 16%. So I think, we're still on the low end. But I agree with Shruti. I mean, I think, we've been just moving towards trying to serve more things, sort of natively, and sort of integrating, branded content, sponsorships where you may not have a CPM type transaction model where you really don't need those impressions to be counted. So trying to, come up with more creative ways to support advertisers. Now, that's a challenge because that doesn't work with a lot of publishers because you're serving many customers, and a lot of times the serving is dynamic. So that only works in certain cases. But ultimately, I think I agree with Shruti. It's like customers have been ignoring banner ads for some time. I mean, all the banner blindness studies, sort of show that with eye tracking. And I think, the real solution is better advertising and better storytelling, and not trying to tell a brand story in a little, 300 by 250 box that's sort of just placed somewhere on a page that looks out of place and really is not contextual to what the consumer is trying to do.
And so you can do that, but what happens when 50% of consumers that are visiting your site, because not everybody's doing that yet, have ad blockers?
Well, I mean, you're going to clearly people are losing tons.
Oh, I think we.
I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, you're coming through.
I think folks have to sort of think about more long-term solutions and sort of what sort of ad model they're going to have to support, because this is just not going away. I mean, you can try strategies to circumvent ad blocking, but I think for us the writing's on the wall. It's funny that we're pretty frustrated. Google, we feel like needs to take more of a leadership position, but they have the whole display impression-based, company with DoubleClick, and yet they have Chrome, which is, for us, the #1 browser. So we're trying to figure out, sort of why Google hasn't taken more of a leadership role in sort of helping to navigate and sort of help publish their business and a large portion of what makes the web great and unique.
All right, Stephen, you're cutting out a little bit. So I'm going to go to Simon. And Simon, let's bring it up a level. And can you talk a little bit about, you've certainly got experience with this at the time, how do you talk about the issue of ad blocking and ad unblocking or ad recovery within the business? Who do you involve in that? How controversial is it? How high and wide, is there an awareness with the business of this kind of the trouble of ad blocking and then the options to do something about it? Can you talk about that management discussion a little bit and how that works?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the problem kind of comes to a head. If the site that you're looking at hasn't got a sell through, an effective sellout rate, then it's kind of hiding behind the problem. So you can have 20, 30% ad blocking if your sell through rate can cope with that. It's when your sell through rate is maxed out when it starts to become a problem, and then that starts raising up the management chain for those discussions. At Time Inc., it wasn't top of the agenda. There's many other issues that have been dealt with, and ad blocking wasn't necessarily making it to the top. But there were kind of movements to try and figure out how we could unblock some of that revenue, particularly where websites were at a very high sell-through rate. And echoing what the other guys are saying as well about the move away from traditional advertising banners and leaderboards, etc., and trying to do a bit more native. And I think the problem with doing that is you're trying to experiment with native whilst still trying to keep the revenues from other things at the same level. So those two compete against each other. And again, management, senior management is then very interested and gets involved in that. From an ad blocking point of view, I certainly have never had any conversations at Time Inc. where senior execs are saying, should we be doing this? Is this ethical to stop people from blocking our content? There's not been a conversation saying we shouldn't do that.
Got it. Shruti, you want to jump in on that at all with your clients? We'll have some content on ethics later, but can you talk about, within your clients, where is this discussion happening, and is this at what level in the organization it needs to occur?
So yes, I think the chief digital officers or the CMOs, they are getting a lot more concerned. Where I'm actually seeing is that from a decision-making perspective, if you call there is a search budget, a display budget. The display budget is where it's going more towards within the Facebook or the social immersive experiences, as I mentioned. So I think, as I said, they want more from the publishers, the partners, to come up with, which is not only just related to on a site experience, in store, in app, within the location, and we know that the desktop revenue, there's a lot more going less on the desktop, versus now I think the significant traffic is coming through mobile and within the in-apps experiences. So I mean, from this perspective, what I have to say that the industry, I mean, if you guys remember, advertising is has been there forever. If we remember from a digital space, pop-ups was the first thing that was the most annoying things, and then we've evolved and come a long way. And I feel that there are going to be alternative solutions, and there are some of the social partners, and there are industry leaders that are going to take a little bit of a higher ground on this approach, and we will right now, I mean, there are a couple of companies that are really effectively now offering some of the solutions that people that have used ad blocking, we can actually use that data and we can figure out a way to use them and to target them in a much more different and immersive way. So those are the discussions that we are coming forward.
That's very interesting. So Shruti, it leads into a kind of follow-up question for you, which is, can you talk a little bit about the consumer motivation for installing ad blockers in the first place? What's driving consumers to do this? Is what's causing them to adopt ad blockers? What does that tell us about what we should and not do, as publishers? And further on that is, should you think about a different experience if you detect a consumer has an ad blocker installed? Should you treat them the same or differently than another site visitor who doesn't?
Yeah. So so I'll answer this in two parts. So the consumer adoption and the reason for the motivation is not as much as ads, it's the tracking, it's ad tracking, or it's the tracking that the moment I click a banner, I know what you're doing. It's the assurance of that the privacy that is invaded is where the people more and more are getting aware of, and that's what's striking that. So that's the motivation part. And the reason is that we as marketers have done a very poor job in giving access to these kind of information to very unsophisticated companies or I would say some publishers that have not used this effectively, and what they've done is they've misused it. So we're at a stage where I'm over-targeted on certain ads. You guys, everybody knows what is exactly being purchased and then what needs to be recommended. So we've lost that borderline, and that's where now people are like, okay, back off, and we don't need. But as far as ads are concerned, that's not going to go away. People still like to hear stories. I mean, half of the time, I learn things from the ads that we don't even know about. So it's the kind of way for us to be updated and be out there. So that's where I feel. And your second question is that should we provide different advertising experience? I mean, I think I'm harping on this a little bit too much, but absolutely, because like, for example, if Pandora is coming with a different music stations based on your using that data, misusing the data and effectively using the data, I think that's where we've lost our. So it's a time for us to like rethink the strategy of what we really want to go out in the market with.
Got it. So I will share some data that I've seen, because we're unblocking about 7 billion of ads a month now, and what we see is very interesting in this topic is that it turns out when you re-enable high quality ads for consumers that have installed ad blockers, they actually have a higher engagement and higher clicks than the pool, the other pool of consumers who have it. And I think some of it is because those consumers just don't normally see ads. And so it's a kind of an interesting idea to think about targeting that group, given that they don't see stuff on most of the rest of the internet. Let me go to Simon, and taking the international perspective, Simon, our data shows that in the US and EMEA, about 90% of ad blockers are consumer installed. We also see, though, that in Asia, particularly mobile blockers are being installed by carriers. They're putting ad blockers on mobile phones to try to save bandwidth that comes with, video and image-based ads. What do you think is going to happen there? Do you think any US and European carriers will start to deploy ad blocking really at scale? Will we see it, coming default on devices or even in networks?
Well, I think it's really cheeky what they've been doing there, because I think them trying to save bandwidth is not about ad blocking. Although for a consumer, if you think about a consumer who's got a pay-as-you-go deal, is not on a contract and has limited data, the website size is triple, quadruple plus when you load ads. So consumers might appreciate that. In Europe, there was a small trial that I'm aware of with one of the operators, and publishers basically started talking together and threatening to block traffic from their website if that particular network was going to block adverts by default, then the publisher would block the content from that mobile provider. So they weren't going to win that battle. I'm not sure of the details in Asia, but I think that is a danger. It could happen. I also think that, as you said earlier, Google installing it by default, or if somebody like McAfee picks it up and starts installing it by default and having it switched on by default, that could all of a sudden create a massive problem overnight for publishers.
So that says something like people should think about this. How could I be ready for that to happen so you don't completely crater? Is that really where you're going?
Yeah, I think people should, be very mindful that it only takes a big company that's got a wide adoption to do something, and overnight. I mean, we've seen it with Google time and time again with their algorithm changes. They'll wipe out businesses in the space of 24 hours by making an algorithm change that then puts that particular business completely out because it just doesn't work for them. In fairness, it's normally when they've been doing something that probably isn't the best user experience, but you could argue that about publishers and all the adverts that we're stuffing on websites.
Got it. So let's go from the gloom and doom. That's the good European to.
Sorry, Dan. Sorry.
I know. That's why we love you. So Stephen, let's go back to you, and hopefully your connection's a little better now. And because you guys are taking you guys have gone far down the path of just turning on unblocking, right? And so that simply means that when a consumer who's got an ad blocker comes to your website, they're going to see ads, and it'll be transparent to them. Can you talk about that a little bit? What most marketers and advertisers will be worried about is that going to piss off consumers? Is that going to make your customers mad? Can you share data you have on that? I'm sure that was an internal concern. What really happened when you started turning ads back on for consumers who had installed blockers, and kind of how's it worked out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very concerned. So we ran a lot of A/B testing so we could isolate the unblocked group in a couple different challengers. And so what we actually saw was there was there was some impact to bounce rate, but it was very minimal. I mean, I think it was in like the less than 10% variance. But what we did see was actually page views per session was actually up, and what was most interesting to us is our lead conversion. People actually sending leads or communicating to dealerships through our platform actually increased. So we, from that standpoint, and I think we're a little unique in that our site's all about cars and automotive, and except for some programmatic stuff that runs sort of on the edges, most of our advertising is all about automotive. So, I think one of the unfortunate things, and I think Shruti touched on this, is, contextual advertising and the fact that, it's really easy to turn ad blocking on, but there's not great solutions to sort of whitelist. That's just, I feel like it's asking the customer to do a little too much. So, I think, and overall, we've been super happy with how the unblocking has, sort of helped us recoup a portion of what gets blocked, and it really hasn't had an impact to our business from a revenue standpoint or an engagement standpoint.
That's great. So would you say that can you make any comments at all? And you feel free to say no, but on how this is from an engagement or viewability or revenue perspective. Disabling ad blockers is really the wrong term. It's really helping because you don't touch the ad blocker. You're just
right.
They're seeing ads again, right? Any metrics or guidance for folks about what to expect if they took that approach?
I mean, guidance would be to test, and run your A/B tests, and really understand what your key metrics are, and run that for as long as you need to get to sort of statistical significance. So that's super important so that you really know what's going to happen. And I think, we're recouping, we have a high sell-through rate, so we sell out our inventory. I think Simon made a good point. So, we're in the we're in the high 90% sell-through rate, and we're recouping essentially half of all the revenue that gets blocked. So, that's significant for us when we're at a 16% block rate.
That certainly matters. And I know I have other clients who have as high as a 70% block rate. And imagine what that would look like, right? So
yeah, that's
good stuff.
Yeah, but do you guys know that that now there are companies coming up that are actually now aggregating that data from like people that have done ad blocking, and then are also figuring out how to like sell those data points to the people. So I don't want to name them, but they're available to build partnerships, and you can start serving them not ads, but serving them in an immersive way.
Right. So Shruti, that's a kind of good follow-up, because is that an interesting group? I mean, certainly one of the things that we're able to do is detect, who's using an ad blocker, right? That's and then, this is what our product does, right? And I'm not trying to do a commercial, but just it'll detect, who's coming to your site, who's using an ad blocker, and then what do you want to do? Do you want to send them a please, whitelist us, or please disable your ad blocker, or do you just want to show them ads? How do you think about targeting those folks as a segment? Could you imagining, here's your segment of it tends to be, highly educated, higher income, younger males, or where you see the highest penetration. So is that even a segment folks should think about?
It is an important segment. I mean, I will not, they are educated, they are the people that have much more disposable income. Those are the people that the brands would want to be targeting, so we definitely cannot ignore them. What we have to then do is we have to be very creative and understand now that what is it, the motivations and triggers that can really drive an engagement, and that is where the KPIs are going to change. I mean, I think we've been talking through this, is like the CPMs and the impressions. Is that what's the critical thing, or should it be really the engagement and the content that is being received? And I think that goes a long way, is what is the creative that is getting delivered and customized based on. So I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but Hulu had this experience where they gave you 3 options: which ads did you want to watch? So and whatever closest to, and that data was very, very critical for some of the brands to be able to understand, okay, what is the site, what is the thinking, and what's the mentality. So I think, to answer your question, it's a very lucrative segment. We cannot ignore it. I don't know that we have perfected the solution yet, but there are companies that are coming that are building up, and we are very aggressively already partnering and bringing them within the network. Great.
So Simon, I have another good European guy question, which is about ethics. I've walked into so many CFOs, and the first thing out of their mouths about consumers using ad blockers is, they're stealing from me. And I find that marketing people tend to be a little more empathetic than that. So can you talk about, just the consumer side ethics? Are consumers who've installed ad blockers, are they in a good ethical position? Are they actually stealing from publishers? Are they trying to put journalists out of business? Or are they just, simply unaware, and does that even matter? Can you talk about that?
I think in general they're completely unaware of the impacts of what they're doing. They're just trying to consume content quicker without annoying ads all over the place. So I think the end consumer in general is that the experience of installing ad blocking software doesn't feel, sneaky or anything like that. It doesn't feel like, when you know, those terrible people that used to run, you know, Napster and steal from all this music and you know, all the illegal downloading sites where you can get a piece of content for free, which is normally, you know, a music file or a video file, maybe somebody walking past that filmed in the cinema, etc. So I don't think it's, people don't consider it like that, and they certainly don't consider it the same as, you know, walking into a shop and walking out with a handful of goods without paying for them. I mean, we could, as an industry, try and educate people to that's what they're doing, but I just don't think that will work. And on the reverse side of it, are we, by installing or reinstalling ads on sites where people are blocking those ads, is that ethical? I absolutely don't. I completely disagree that there is anything wrong there. You are just trying to recover revenues that would otherwise be lost. I mean, if you really had great, unique content, then I think you would find a way to stop a user completely from viewing your content if they had an ad blocker. But obviously, you know, the technologies that are around are preventing that from happening. So, yeah, I think it's, people don't care is the short answer to that.
Hey, Dan.
Really good. Yes.
I mean, I think one thing we haven't really touched on is the user experience and sort of the performance impact. Because I think, you know, what we hear, and, you know, I talk to a lot of the millennials in our office about, you know, when I see ad blockers or when I talk to them about it, and I think, you know, a lot of people justify it as like, you know, the site is slow, and when I turn the ad blocker on, like my pages load quickly and I'm able to get what I'm done. So, you know, back 15 years ago, you know, we had animated GIFs that were super simple as, you know, as our display ads, and then over time, you know, tracking and I think programmatic has really sort of sped this, you know, sort of adoption up, because, you know, now you call an ad server and you get back HTML, and, you know, as a publisher, we feel like we've really lost control of our user experience, because you don't have complete control of not only the creative, but what are the fourth party tracking pixels that are coming back, you know, who's written this JavaScript. You know, a lot of times we see stuff breaking our site and just not returning, and so, you know, it's basically, you know, blocking and preventing the page to completely load and be functional. So, you know, I think there is an aspect to sort of people are just justifying that, like, you know, this site or these sites aren't working, but when I turn the ad blocker on, things speed up, and I'm much more efficient in what I'm doing and sort of getting through the web on things I need to do.
So and that's a great segue, and we're almost to the, by the way, we'll start the question and answer session in about 2 minutes. It's a super great segue, and I just want to follow up with you, Stephen, on this is, so look, if the broad discussion we're having is really around viewability and consumer engagement and revenue, and we see that ad blocking is disruptive to all those things, and like you just said, consumers are, you know, not mostly, we're saying, not ill-motivated by installing ad blockers. You know, what advice do you have for your peer companies? There's 300 companies on this webcast right now. What should they go do if they're trying to optimize consumer engagement and viewability and revenue? You might want to talk a little more about viewability, even because I know that's a big topic for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really need to sort of think, you know, long term about, you know, sort of the value that your site provides to your customers, and really begin to plan, because you're not going to fix this in 12 months. You know, we're looking at, you know, really an 18-month and a 3-year strategy to really address this, and we are taking steps to actually move to serving, you know, almost 100% native. It's going to take us a while to get there, and we're sort of, you know, figuring out the technology stack that's going to enable us to do that. But we just, you know, we sort of see the writing on the wall. I don't believe Google, and, you know, Google's going to do anything to fix this, even though I think they could do a lot more. But it's clear from their positioning with Chrome, and even with, sort of some minimal things they've been doing with the better ads, effort. We just don't see it changing. So we're taking matters into our own hands, and we're going to sort of figure out our own destiny and not rely on, Google to sort of decide what our destiny is, and really begin to sort of site serve and figure out sort of a technology stack which allows us to really integrate the offer and figure out a way to audit.
Okay, we're cutting out a little bit on Stephen. So let me just do the last question, and I'm going to address this to Simon and Shruti. It was so interesting that as we signed up, as I said, we're working with about 50 of the top ComScore publishers are working with Instart on ad unblocking, and it was really interesting. It was a big challenge to get folks to present on the webcast today to talk about ad unblocking and ad blocking. Could you just close us out with, Simon, why are professionals reluctant to talk about this topic, and are they, and should they be?
It's not. I think it's just another problem that publishers are facing in terms of monetizing their content, and I think it is. We've talked about the ethics, and there's arguments on both sides about the ethics, and I don't think companies want to go out there particularly and promote the fact that they're working to unblock ads, because that just further irritates their customers. So I think it's around the friction with their customers, and the customers are irritated enough to install an ad blocker. Then trying to stuff an advert back on there again is just going to further irritate them. So I don't think publishers want to be open and honest about what they're trying to do.
Got it. Shruti, anything to add to that as we get to questions?
Just one last thing is that we just have to, exactly from when we're doing the advertising, let's not do digital advertising for the reason for doing it. There has to be a two-way communication and understanding the value that we are providing. So when we are creating content, it just shouldn't be like, okay, let's just do it because everyone is doing it. So thinking it through from a consumer standpoint, and I'm sure everyone tries to do it, but if you look out there, there's still a lot of sort of like bad, not very great best practices being implemented, and I think we should definitely look into what we are putting out in the market.
Great. I mean, my perspective on this is I would like to figure out a way to partner with ad blocking companies. They're doing good work, and I think they're trying to take most of them the moral high ground. And certainly we won't, we're trying to do the same thing, make sure that ads work well for everybody and the people aren't doing obnoxious stuff. And that would be an interesting, that's kind of a development I would love to see. So with that, let's open up to questions.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Dan, Shruti, Stephen, and Simon for all your great insights. Just a reminder for all of our attendees, the full recording of the webinar will be made available to you in a follow-up email. And now we're moving on to the question and answer portion of the webinar. You can submit questions at any time through the GoToWebinar platform. And our first question is actually for you, Shruti. Are in-app or integrated content, is that the best way to go, or is it a mix of ad serving for the best ROI?
That's actually a very good question. So yes, right now it's going to be a mix, because you cannot just only rely on in-apps and only on. So and when I say to the direct response clients, that's where we have started to muddy our user experiences, and that's where it's starting to become very challenging. So I think and programmatic has to be slightly blamed that has created this this experience. So it is going to be, for now, it's going to be the mix until publishers also come back with some good, strong value propositions. But I think at this point we cannot. It's going to be a part of it, but it's moving more towards social and more towards Google-based products.
Right. Okay, so the next question, which actually was paired with this question, but whoever wants to answer this, it's if display ads aren't getting penetrated or being served to specific segments on the channels that customers are engaged the most, what is the workaround?
Okay, so if display ads are not the ones, then there is opt-in sort of media that we can go after. There is more native sort of placements. There is sponsored content. There is much more sort of like rich media units that can be done. I'll give you an example of partnerships with, like, say, Mashable, BuzzFeeds. They are coming, or even Outline. Those are the publishers that are actually really thinking out of the box to really start to come through. But again, as long as we can only be as good as our publishers and what they can offer. So I completely hear you that the publishers are not ready yet, and many times even we struggle on that front, that how do we bring that forward. But it's coming, and it is shifting. I think I can see already 60% of the budget moving towards more native style placements, and then 40% to the budget, and I think I soon will start to see towards splitting between 80-20.
Awesome. So this question is for the whole panel. Have any of you experimented with giving readers the option of paying to view content with an ad blocker as an alternative choice to whitelisting?
Simon here. I think unfortunately, still the micro payment piece from a web point of view is still very difficult. And if somebody wants to subscribe to your content, then it has to be very unique. If somebody wants to take one piece of content and just consume that one piece of content, the price point has got to be very low. And I think that overall, it's not a particularly frictionless process to purchase an article. So we didn't get very far with that model at timing.
This is Dan. Many of the publishers that we're working with have tried that model, and it has failed miserably. Consumers just won't do it. You have to be a very, very special site with super high-end, unique content that people really want. They can't get anywhere else to even think about it, and that just doesn't apply to 95% or 99% of publishers in the world. So it's people have tried it, and it's always failed.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
I mean,
Okay.
I agree with Dan. That needs to be sort of something that's like a key. You need to make work just as a publisher, regardless of ad blocking. So if that's a business model that works for you, you need to prove that out. One way or the other, but it shouldn't be in response to ad blocking, because I think you will fail.
Right. Thanks, Stephen. The next question, is letting the customer pay for access a feasible way to go? Maybe offering an ad-free experience for money on unique content?
That's the same as the question that was just asked.
Yeah.
Really.
Awesome. So
the answer is no, that doesn't work. Unfortunately.
This is also to all the panelists. How big of an impact do you project Google Chrome ad blocking will really make on your bottom line?
Depends how they implement it and how aggressive they are with it. If it's a fairly hidden feature, I think it'll be minimal. If it's on by default, then the impact will be huge, particularly as Chrome is one of the biggest browsers globally.
Right.
Yeah,
sorry, Dan, but the other thing I feel is that Google is actually going to come up with because they have their own double-click platforms, they are going to come up with its own acceptable policy, and they are, what we are thinking is that they're going to be having IAB sort of a badge where your experiences are going to like they'll approve and disapprove ads, like how, for a very long time, if you guys remember, like Facebook didn't allow the news feed more than 40% of the text. So I think they're going to start to come through that too.
Yeah, I think that Google, and first is you can go start downloading the canary builds of Chrome and to make sure you get ahead of this and kind of see what they do to you, and that's their kind of alpha channel, right? I think the second thing is that Google's not being entirely evil here. I think they are motivated. Part of their motivation is to make ads better as a defensive thing for them. Remember all of the kind of antitrust and other things that they're facing, with how big they are. So I really do think that part of their motivation is positive, and they're going to try to work with advertisers and publishers on, what are acceptable ads, what are ads consumers like. The risk, of course, is that I'll ask it as a question, will Google, allow the kinds of ads that DoubleClick doesn't serve? That'll be very interesting as we go forward.
So just even with that, would you pay to be whitelisted on Google Chrome if that ever becomes an option?
Anyone?
It's definitely an interesting hypothetical question.
Yeah, well, so I can again share. Go ahead, Simon.
Unfortunately, sharing even more revenue with Google just makes that giant even bigger. So I think publishers would be very, very reluctant to do that unless it was an extremely competitive rev share model.
I know my experience here is that this is one of the things that's an emotional issue for around the ad blockers, because some of the ad blockers have that same model where you can pay to be whitelisted, and many advertisers and marketers find that kind of offensive. That's kind of the Taliban model of holding people hostage for ransom. Not all of them are that way, but I think that revenue model for the ad blockers is certainly not something that many publishers feel good about. And it's hard for me to imagine Google doing that.
So even also along with this, do you think we'll be talking about ad blocking in 5 years?
Simon?
I'm sure it will be on to the next irritant by then. We would have solved it or moved on. I think it's similar. We talked about pop-ups, for example. These things come along, disrupts, and then various technologies get around them, overcome them. Publishers work to do something different. I think publishers in this case have to work to do something quite different.
I think the bigger issue is really, how are publishers going to stay alive? Can we figure out monetization models for journalism, for publishing, that actually work? I mean, that's to me the really, really bigger issue. And certainly Simon and Stephen can talk about that a little bit. That's what I'm more worried about is, what's the business model if I want to be a newspaper or I want to be a publisher of unique content?
We actually have a question from an attendee asking pretty much that. Where does this all lead? It seems like there's a constant cat and mouse game with no clear resolution. Will publishers that cannot directly sell integrated advertising ask users to provide payment in order to survive?
Simon, you want to hit that?
I think it's incredibly difficult for publishers. If you think about the traditional magazine business, there are a limited number of publishers out there. There's a high cost to entry, and therefore content was relatively shallow in terms of the choice. Whereas with online, if you want to read about your favorite sports team, there are so many websites out there that have got opinions, got strong journalism, and if they come and irritate you by too many ads or ask you to pay for content, then you just move elsewhere. I think that's what online has brought, so much choice, and consumers are no longer kind of stuck to a certain brand, unless that brand is unique, is incredibly powerful. And there are not that many of those brands on the internet today.
Yep, agree. So with that, I want to be thoughtful of time. So I just would like to thank Stephen and Simon and Trudy. You guys did a great job. Clearly lots of depth for doing a really informative, panel about this important topic. So I just want to thank you all.
Yes, thanks again, Daniel, and our panelists, and of course to our partner Instart Logic. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you learned something. Keep an eye out on your inboxes for a link to the recording, which you can watch on demand. Thanks.